Good afternoon, I'm the Modern Warfare historian and welcome to a new video. Today we're going to talk a little about barbed wire and its use on the battlefield. So sit down, relax, avoid being entangled and enjoy. Now let's get started. The barbed wire that we usually associate in military application in wars, especially during the Great War, was actually born of civilian necessities. The year is 1873 and the United States plains are full of settlers. These settlers could be divided in various groups, however today we will care about only two: farmers and ranchers. The two groups had different lifestyles, the former using crops to sustain themselves while the latter used animals. Farm animals, most of them have legs. If they don't, there may be a problem. And a living being with legs tends to move around. Farm animals also need food to live, and a lot of times ranches were very near crop farms, and so animals, under the biological drive of hunger, usually and frequently trespassed into farms and ate the food growing there. This was obviously a problem for a lot of people. If you're a farmer, you surely would not be happy about losing all your energy-consuming stocks of crops, and considering that your crops are very probably your only way of surviving, it is understandable why you may be pissed about that. If you're a rancher, you don't want to lose your animals, and having them roam around the countryside may be a bad thing, also because animals could go in dangerous places where they might get stuck or hit by something, like a train. To solve this, there are two possible ways, an active one and a passive one. The active one is to do flock control, basically going around and convincing the animals to come back with, I don't know, a laser, a whip, a horn or whatever. There is also an active way available for the farmers in the form of guns to scare and or hit the animals as it enters your property, but that's a small detail. The passive way is to build a fence around your property to lock in the animals, and with the help of a fence gate, provide them a way to get in and out of the property in a controlled manner. The problem is that sometimes a wood fence may not be good enough to stop the animal, or wood may be scarce in the region, so different ideas are needed. By the 1860s, there were already some designs patented with the objective of using metal to create fences. By 1867, there were already 6 patents issued for barbed wire, but these were hard to mass produce. Let's now jump to 1873. In this year, a certain Harry B. Rose was doing a presentation of its latest invention, the wooden strip with metallic points, that he had patented in May. The design was simply a wooden fence with wire protrusions designed to avoid cows breaking the wooden part of the fence. To see this presentation, there were some people that will go down in the history of barbed wire development, and some even manufacturing. These were Joseph Gitten, Jacob Heisch, and Isaac L. Elwood. Gitten took Rose's invention and made it simpler, cheaper, and easier to produce, transforming it into the metal wire that we all know and love. Okay, no wait, a lot of people hate it, never mind. Glidden experimented with a grindstone to twist two wires together to hold the barbs on the wire in place. The barbs were created from experiments with a coffee mill from his home. Later, Glidden was joined by Elwood, who was an hardware dealer that knew that his design could not compete with Glidden's, for which he applied for a patent in October 1873. Meanwhile, Heisch, a lumber merchant, who had already secured several patents for barbed wire designs, applied for a patent on his third type of wire, the S-barb, and accused Glidden of interference, deferring Glidden's approval for his patent wire, nicknamed the Winner, until November 24, 1874. As barbed wire provided an inexpensive method to control the movement of cattle, it soon became a very profitable business. And soon, most of the agricultural lands in the US were fenced by barbed wire. But what is barbed wire? Basically, it's a line created by a wire and by barbs. The metal is usually 1.5 to 2.5 mm thick. That's around 0.06 to 0.1 inches for you Americans, and is held up by poles. Not them, the other poles. The poles can be made of different materials. If the fence is agricultural one, usually they are made of wood, while if the barbed wire is used to protect and/or enclose a building, they are made of metal. Depending on the general dimension of the fence and the function, the poles will have a different distance between one another. A gate is obviously needed to let people and cattle move in and out. But what about its military application? The first recorded usages of barbed wire en masse were at the end of the 1800s in the various African conflicts between tribes and Europeans. It was used in the Russo-Japanese War, although the most famous usage happened in the First World War. Being that war an almost static one, it gave the possibility to both sides to create various defenses, and one of these was barbed wire. The objective of barbed wire was not to kill or injure enemies. I mean, if it happens, it's great for your side, but still the objective is to slow down the enemy enough so that your defensive assets, like machine guns, can eliminate the enemy soldiers. But even this is not enough, as the best usage is to have it as an interdiction asset. If you don't want your enemy to go into a specific part of the front, place barbed wire there in order to funnel them elsewhere, preferably where more of your machine guns are placed, or keep them in their own trenches as they don't see a gap in the wire. War is always a back and forth affair, so the attacker will usually respond somehow to the barbed wire. The most common response is to eliminate the wire. How do you do that? Well, there are various different ways. You can either try to cut it, you can make it explode, or you can go on top or below it. Let's see the pros and cons of these methods in a little bit of detail. Cutting was probably the first trick tried to destroy the wires, and it generally works. Basically, you send one, or usually more men, with some big scissors and they will cut it. Or, if you are an Italian company Pavesi, you will probably aim to build an armored car to do the job, but I won't digress. Hopefully, some of you already have noticed the problem. Yes, you are sending your men to a place that was almost surely designed as a killing ground. Also, if the enemy knows the importance of its barbed wire, they will probably keep an eye on it in case someone will want and try to damage their defensive asset. This means that there are people in the enemy trench looking at you while you are cutting the wire. And I'm quite sure that if caught, bad things could happen to you. Oh, what you doing, mate? Oh, scheiße. Nothing? Are you sure you're not cutting the wire? Nine, I'm just looking at the wire. Good wire, yeah. You sure? Yeah. Alright, keep it safe, mate. See you around. Yeah, goodbye. It's a nice wire. This means that a lot of men will not come back, so a lot of resources, both in terms of manpower and equipment, will be spent in dealing with enemy barbed wire. It should also be noted that another con is that after cutting it, the wire may get stuck in itself, like when you try to untie your headphones and you end up tying them up more. It's the same thing. This was, and still is, also a dangerous job, as not only you may be hit by the enemy, but you also may be injured by the wire or killed by your own, as they may think you are the enemy wire layer. Because yes, someone will at some time need to replenish the barbed wire, placing more of it in the intended area. This in itself was a dangerous job, as it was time consuming, just like the opposite, cutting it, and you probably need to create some sort of noise while planting it. To solve these, screw pickets were used for the installation of wire obstacles. These were metal rods with eyelets for holding strands of wires, and a corkscrew-like end that could later be screwed into the ground rather than hammered. Returning to the cutting job. You also needed special scissors, called with a lot of fantasy, wire cutters. And in the First World War, some nations tried to give their wire cutters some armor, either to be worn, like the medieval armor, or a mobile shield. I know you may be thinking that cutting the wire will probably go away with time, but nope, it's still used in case you care about a little stealth and you don't need to cut big areas of wire. Second method is to have it go boom. This is divided into above ground explosion and below ground explosion. The above ground explosion sub-methods uses basically artillery or some sort of explosive very close to the wire. If you decide to use artillery to destroy the enemy barbed wire, expect two things for sure. First, you will expend a lot of ammunition. Second, you are going to create a messy entanglement and a lot of craters. Does it work? Yes, of course it does, but there are probably better ways of doing the job. Also, you risk giving the enemy a hint on where your next attack will be. What about other explosives? Well, there is the bungalow torpedo, that is a metal tube with explosive inside, that destroys the wire without creating a crater. It is made of very modular sections, usually around 1.5 meters, that's 5 feet long. It is famous for its use during D-Day by the American forces, yet it was already in use even back in World War I. Another thing you could use is a MICLIC, a mine-clearing line charge. Now, I know, it sounds strange as that is used for mines, and that's true, but that's basically a bungalow that is launched, usually by a rocket or by a hook, and it explodes. The explosion detonates the nearby part of the minefield and also clears up a small section of barbed wire. This system is very useful for mechanized forces, as it can be installed on a tank or an engineering vehicle, and it can have a lot of battlefield mobility. We may do a video on that in the future. Also, in the field of explosions, you can also plant the explosives under the part of dirt that has the barbed wire with a mine, but that's less effective than a bungalow, being this method basically an underground artillery shell. Last but not least, you can crush it with a tank, as it was first done in the First World War. It is effective, yet the tank may remain entangled by the wire, and that will mean a lot of problems that you can easily imagine. By the way, many have the idea that barbed wire was placed in a single line, basically a wire fence. That method of placing was called low wire entanglement, and was used especially in the first part of the First World War, because it slowed down the enemy rather than stopping them. Why? Well, if you want to advance, you don't want to remain stuck yourself in no man's land, so the idea was to use something that was annoying but not so much. I mean, if you are careful, you can step over the wire without touching it. However, as time passed on, the Germans decided to shift their fighting stance to a more defensive one, and started to employ a more messy type of barbed wire. This makes it hard to understand the flow of the wire and to understand where you can cut faster and with less energies. The most common version of barbed wire used today is the Concertina wire. That is basically a coil that can be expanded like a concertina, from which it takes the name. That is a small accordion. It is very fast to deploy, as a platoon of soldiers that knows what they are doing, obviously, can plant a kilometer in an hour. Being it basically a cylinder, more wires can be planted on top, so it is common to see a triple concertina wire in some specific places. Barbed wire are also distinguishable by various types of barbs, from double to quadruple points, like in the early ones, or more complex and effective shapes like the flat type or the welded type, that are both razor-sharp barbs. It can be made of a single coil or a double one, where a smaller coil is inserted in a bigger one. And now, the last topic for today, the future of barbed wire. In my personal humble opinion, it is going to stay, because of it being very cheap and simple to both produce and employ. And not only in the law enforcement or civilian war, where I'm 99.999% sure it will remain, but also in the military operation field, both as a frontier control and active military usage, and I'm quite confident in this statement. This is also thanks to the general trend started by the fact that nations that do not have a big cyber advantage and do not enjoy air superiority are forced to either stay put and try to hold in a simul-trench war style of conflict, like what happened in Nagorno-Karabach in 2020, also because of the very extensive usage of drones, or even by the militarist theories that state that in the future wars will be fought underground. And, just like in the First World War, when a conflict becomes static, barbed wire comes into play. This brings an end to our video. I know this was shorter than the usual Let's Talk About, yet we're being slowed down lately by some external factors, and we prefer to put out a video on a smaller topic rather than a 1-hour video on something crazy that would have took us ages to research, record and edit. Remember that if you like this video, feel free to subscribe to our channel and click the like button. Thank you for watching. Remember to always carry wire cutters with you in case... No wait, that's illegal, never mind.